What's up, metal and heavy music fans? It's Flight of Icarus again with MetalTrenches.com, and today we're going to talk about the new self-titled album from Lamb of God via Nuclear Blast Records. But before I do that, if you like to stay up to date with the best and brightest metal bands and albums from the underground and above, then stick with me by hitting that subscribe button down below. I upload new content every single week. Now, Lamb of God is the 10th studio album from the classic groove metal band, and it's actually the band's first in 5 years since 2015's Sturm und Drang, which makes it the longest gap that they've had between their albums. It is also notably the first to feature Art Cruz replacing original longtime drummer Chris Adler. And after all this time waiting, I have to say,
no, sir, I don't like it.
I'm not particularly a fan. I don't hate it, but I have some things to say about it, having been a long-time fan of Lamb of God, basically since As the Palaces Burn. But let's start with the good, because there are some definitely quality things about this album. I mean, first of all, there are definitely those instantly recognizable classic guitar hooks that you hear it, you know it's Lamb of God, you can pick it out of a lineup, kind of mixing groove with some melodic death metal, some metalcore elements there too, and lots of soloing, lots of flashy stuff. The instrumentation, the musicianship, it's still pretty solid. And as for the question of how does Art do over Chris in the drum department, I mean, it's fine. I'm sure a classically trained drummer, somebody who is much more in the know about that stuff, would have plenty more to say about that. But as far as how they play their instruments on this album, fine. Distraction flows down an obsessive stream. And then there are some pretty decent moments on here too. Memento Mori is a pretty solid opener, although I could do without the long, drawn-out intro that just seems to go on forever and not do a whole lot for me. But once the song actually kicks off, there are some really great riffs in there. I also think these southern grooves on Checkmate kind of recall Redneck, so that's another standout there. A little too much flashy guitar, random kind of just freeform soloing on the beginning. Again, a lot of these tracks could just sort of get to the point, I think, in the first half. Routes is perhaps my favorite track, having listened to this thing over and over several times now. It's got the highest kind of beats per minute. It's the fastest. It's got some of the best verses. I have some things to say about that later on that I don't like as much, but in terms of just a balls to the wall, crush you kind of song, Routes is the way to go. I like the little bass intro that kicks off Reality Bath. Gears is a pretty decent track that's kind of grown on me over time. And yeah, these are all good moments, but overall, I just feel like even the best moments, they're not saying a whole lot. They just feel kind of generic to me. They feel kind of like stuff that I've already heard from the band so many times now that it feels just sort of like a photocopy. It's a photocopy of a photocopy, and it's starting to kind of lose its ink, and it's fading, and it's just not as strong as it was to begin with. I think also some of the lyrics are kind of cringy. The one that stands out to me is on Reality Bath. They've got this whole thing about the new abnormal. This is the new abnormal. Ha! Got him! I feel like Randy wrote that line and was just damn, that's so clever. And it's not. It's just really cringy. It's not clever. It's just kind of lame. Every time I hear that line, it's a decent song too, but I hear that line and I'm just oh my gosh, this line thinks that it's the smartest thing ever. It's the greatest play on words, but it's really not. And I think just across the board too, I think this album kind of gets bogged down into the conceptual elements of it. I can tell that Randy and maybe other band members too were raging a lot about things that are going on politically, and I feel like that started to overshadow the music itself because they're just not that interesting to listen to. And at the end of the day, if you're a musician, that needs to come first. even the attempts at trying some new things don't work out all that well. Resurrection Man has a cool intro with this little like music box, and then Randy's got this super righteous blah that he kicks it off with. But after that moment, I was expecting like, oh, this is going to be the song that I love. I thought that was going to be the highest octane one. It doesn't go anywhere. It just sort of like peters out instantly after that. Ends up being a pretty slow song. And it's just an odd choice to me to kick off the song in such a high energy way and then just go at snail's pace the rest of the time. Jamie Josta has a guest appearance on Poison Dream, which is fine, but it feels very kind of shoehorned. I don't feel like it gels all that well with the rest of the music. Because you're not a human being, just a fight to be paid. Just, it's fine. And then Routes, again, which, like I said, I enjoyed, but I'm not that big of a fan of Chuck Billy's guest appearance on this one, really. Like, I just don't feel like it adds a ton to the song. It's not the better part of the song. In fact, it's my least favorite part of the song. And I just couldn't help but keep thinking about how much better his guest appearance on the latest Kill Switch Engage album was, which ironically, when that song dropped, I was very much like, wow, this is like a Lamb of God song. And I was like, wow, this is like a better Lamb of God song than anything I'm hearing particularly on this album, but I digress. Bloodshot Eyes also has some singing on it that's pretty questionable. I don't mind that they're trying to bring some singing into Lamb of God. I am perfectly fine with plenty of other bands that are doing singing right now. I made a very positive review about the latest like Make Them Suffer album. But unfortunately, Randy's just not a very good singer. Like, his voice isn't particularly interesting, and you can get by not being like a great singer if you have an interesting voice, but I just don't feel like he does. I miss the pig squeals. I miss a lot of stuff, which is funny to me. Like, that's what I was really excited about with Sturm und Drang. Like, he brought back some of the pig squeals. That was a very high intensity album that I quite enjoyed, and this one just feels like several steps back from that. And I'm not sure exactly why or what happened, but even the songs I named earlier, the ones that I would consider my favorites on this album, are just sort of, again, generic. They just don't do a lot for me. I get this distinct feeling throughout the course of this album that it's just been there, done that. I've heard this all before. And it just doesn't thrill me. Like, it doesn't grip me. And it's not that I'm just hanging on to, you know, I wish this sounded more like As the Palaces Burn or Ashes of the Wake. Of course, those are classic albums and my favorites, but I really liked Sturm und Drang. I really enjoyed Resolution. And so I like some of their newer, more recent albums, and this still falls very short of that. I have similar criticisms, I guess, of this album that I had for the latest Suicide Silence, but I guess to Lamb of God's credit, at least, they have the musicianship working for them. Like, they know how to play their instruments a lot better. They know how to write catchier songs, and so this is definitely a better album than that, but I couldn't help but realize that I have some of the same qualms with this album that I did with that one. If I was giving this rankings just as of right now, I feel like I need a little bit more time for it to sink in, and maybe it'll grow on me over time like Wrath did. But as of right now, it's kind of a 7 for enjoyability. Like, it's fine. I enjoy it. I don't hate it. There's nothing on here that's like truly objectionable, but I'm just not like, when I throw on Lamb of God, I expect to be like ready to go to the gym and like push up some weight, but not in this case. It's a 9 for musicianship. They're, again, all playing their instruments very well. And yeah, performance-wise, things are pretty solid. And then for innovation, I actually give them a 6. I kind of cranked them down even below a C because, like I said, it feels like they've taken some steps backwards on this one as opposed to forwards. So all that rounding out to a C, which feels fair. It's just a very middle-of-the-road kind of average album. And ultimately, it's probably my least favorite that the band has put out to date. Again, it may grow on me. We'll have to see if that ends up happening. I may do a follow-up video in the future, maybe a year from now. I also am kind of interested to do that. But definitely check out my tier list if you're interested in hearing my thoughts on all of the other albums. I walked through the whole discography in order and ranked them tier list style. And you'll get a lot more of my insight into how I feel about these albums too. Because again, I don't want people to watch this and say, oh, he just likes the older stuff. That could not be further from the truth. But let me know what you think in the comments, and of course stick around because there's plenty more reviews like this one. There's also album roundups. I try to focus more on underground groups, but every now and then there's a more mainstream group like Lamb of God that I've been a fan for a long time, and I like to talk about them to draw in new audience members to then push over and check out my playlists on all of the underground bands that honestly are making way better albums than this one. So if you liked this one even, there's better stuff out there. Please check it out. Also, I do tier lists, like I said. I've got the podcast where I interview these bands. In the description, you'll also find links to all of our social media, the email newsletter, and our Patreon and Subscribestar if you want to make that extra leap to becoming a supporter. But mainly, just, again, subscribe if you haven't already. Stick around, watch these next videos. But Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.
Got him!